much for joining us. We're going to talk about watches with Brian Dunnigan, who is crafting watches.
I am, yes.
And they are beautiful. We're going to talk about that. We also, when we look at these watches, there is also a purple heart sitting next to the watches. And that was your grandfather's.
It was.
Who was in World War II. And it's beautiful. I just want to show it just a second. So that's an actual purple heart. He was wounded in World War II.
Yes.
Tell me about your grandfather and how he inspired you to start a watch company by the name of Hawthorn Watch Company.
Yes. So my grandfather was a great man. And I think the idea for the company of starting to make watches was sort of always in the back of my head, but I never really consciously knew it. Growing up, I always saw his watchmaking bench in the basement. I always saw his little tools, and I was always sort of fascinated by watches, but I don't know if I necessarily knew that I wanted to do this until I sort of had a dream where, and it was a literal dream, where I had made a watch, and that watch isn't really feasible with the laws of physics, I guess. It's sort of a strange idea, but it just sort of planted this idea that, oh, maybe I'll make some watches. And it all because, I think it was all because I saw his watchmaking things when I was growing up.
And he worked in New Haven.
He did.
First in Massachusetts. He worked for a company up there.
Yep, that's where, it's actually because of the GI Bill for World War II. They give you money to study, they would give you money to learn a trade. So he decided he was going to learn watchmaking. So he went to the Hawthorn Watch Company in Massachusetts, learned how to be a watchmaker, and then took that knowledge back to Connecticut and worked in New Haven working on watches.
Let's take a look at some photos of your grandfather, because I want folks to know, first of all, he served our country. Now tell me about this photo.
So this is right when he came home from World War II.
Bernard Brown, we should say.
Bernard Brown,
Bernie.
Yes. Bernie, yes. That's him in his jacket, and we still have that jacket. It fits me perfectly because we're about the same size, yep. So, yeah, that's him coming home from war.
And as we continue to look at the photos of your grandfather, how did he inspire you? First of all, you know, we have to thank him for serving our country.
Absolutely.
As you watched him making watches, were you just fascinated by that as a kid?
I think I was. You know, he had the loop in his eye, and he was always so close to the watches, and everything is so tiny, like minuscule, and you just sort of wonder how you can be so dexterous to get in there and work on those tiny little bits. And it was something that just sort of neat to me, and I've always been sort of like a detail person, so being able to get everything to line up perfectly was just fascinating.
So there must be some engineering in your background, because you have to engineer a watch.
Well, you do, and that's where my partner, Jeremy Crossgrove, comes in, a friend from college. I had the idea for the watch, that I was going to make some watches, and I knew how to design the faces because I'm a designer, but I had no idea how to engineer the cases. And he's an industrial designer, and he works for, he's worked on medical implants for spines and things like this. So I said, I'll reach out to him and see if he can help me. Maybe I can pay him to do some things. And it had been a couple of years since we talked. So I said, hey, you know, I have this idea to make a watch. You think you could help me engineer the case? And he was like, oh my God, I love watches. He's like, let's just do this. Like, let's make this a pet project. So,
what was your major at UConn?
It was communication design, which is essentially graphic design.
And were you thinking about watches when you were at UConn?
I don't know if I was specifically thinking about watches as opposed to things you could hold, physical objects. So when we would make books, for example, and you got to actually hold your design and feel it and look through it and get to experience it, I think that was something nice. And I think that's what drew me towards making a physical object. It's because, like, look, I made this, like it was on my screen, it was in my sketchbook, and now it's this physical thing on my wrist.
Exists.
It exists.
I want to go back to some more photos of your grandfather and talk about him. Now, this is you and your grandfather.
Is me.
So little did you know you would be making a watch. And let's go to the next one. Mowing the lawn with Grandpa.
Yeah,
right?
I think this is the most famous photo I have, like family famous photo of us together. I absolutely love it.
It's adorable.
Yeah.
And we have a few more. Now this is when he was wounded.
When he was wounded, yes.
And as you found this article, what were you thinking?
I never really thought, I always heard he was wounded in war, but you never really sit down and think about that. So talking with my grandmother and, pulling up the article, it's like, this was serious, it it was something that affected his life and my grandmother's life and ultimately my life, because if he didn't make it through, if he didn't have the surgery in battle, then I wouldn't be here today with these things.
And the Purple Heart.
And the Purple Heart.
Which is beautiful. All right, so Brian, let's go through these watches.
Sure.
I love them because they are very vintage looking. And if you look at my watch, which is not one of yours, look at how big it is. I mean, I wear a really big watch.
Yeah.
So how did you pick the colors? How did you pick the faces?
Sure. So we're going sort of for like a vintage aesthetic with this, maybe 50s or 60s. I think vintage things are coming back now, things that are made of really high quality.
To me, they're always in.
Yeah, things made of really high quality materials that'll last. You have your grandfather's tools, and those tools are passed down to your father and will be passed down to you, and maybe tools today aren't as great. The same thing, we want to create something that could be passed down through generations that's going to last you, made of really high quality materials. So that's why we have these two different styles of watches here. We have one with the batons, which are the lines denoting the hour markers. We also have the one with the numbers, both 40 millimeters, both made of, or all of them are made of stainless steel, 316L stainless steel. It's important to denote 316L stainless steel because it's surgical grade stainless steel, which means that it's not going to corrode, it's not going to react to your skin. Companies will use lesser stainless steels to save money, but they could react to your skin, they could corrode, things like that. So we wanted something that was going to last.
You're making something timeless that can get passed down to a grandson, to a son. Colors of watch bands. Tell me about the bands.
Yes, so the bands, we have 2 bands now with plans to do many more actually. So we have a black and a brown. They are leather that's tanned in Maine by this fantastic tannery in Maine, made by a company in Florida who actually manufactures straps for Cartier. So we actually have, I know, so we actually have really, really nice straps, and once you sort of feel them and wear them, they get buttery soft, and it's really great.
As you make these watches, and now you've got 4 made, and you're not even open yet, there's no bricks and mortar, you're going to start a Kickstarter program for this, because it takes a lot of money to get up and running.
It does.
What are you telling folks on your Kickstarter, and how much are the watches?
Sure. So the idea is that we want to build this company. We don't just want to make these watches and be done. We want to actually make this a business. So that's why we turned to Kickstarter, which allows us to offer these watches for pre-sale, essentially, to get us seed money to get everything going. So the MSRP of the watches will be $299, but for the Kickstarter, we're going to do it for $149, just sort of as like a thank you for getting us started with our business, and thanks for being in on the ground floor. This is your discount, and just to help out.
How many guys start a watch company? Because I would think that's really hard to do.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a barrier of entry in terms of knowledge. The first thing we did, we were designing things, and you go, actually, how do you make a watch? You sit there and I had no idea, and it takes a lot of research, a lot of trial and error, a lot of samples, a lot of back and forth. So I thought we could do it in a couple of months and be like, oh, this is going to be very easy. And we're 15 months in now, and we're finally ready to go.
And you've been working in secret.
In secret,
Why was that?
Well, I don't know. I've always sort of liked the idea of a big surprise. So when we actually finally told the people about the watches, like friends and family and things like that, which was only like a couple of weeks ago, everyone was just blown away. Like, what? You're doing this? So I think it was that, but then there was also the idea that, it's such a long process, and we didn't know how long the process was going to be. We didn't want people to get bored or tired of us telling the story over and over again, or that, oh yeah, it's coming along, but it's coming along slowly. So it was more just big reveal, shock to everyone, and press go.
Now you said this all started with a dream.
It did.
As you're making this and as you're rolling this out, do you feel your grandfather guiding you a little bit? I
do. He gave me a watch, or I inherited a watch from...
Was that his?
It was. This is from the 1970s. So I wear this watch around with me sort of as a good luck charm, especially when I'm presenting watches like this and talking about this, because he's such a big influence in this whole project. And
as you roll things out, is there going to be women's watches as well? I mean, although this would be perfect for me as
right, right.
Out.
Yeah, there are definitely plans for smaller cases in the future. I think this is, so 40 millimeters is an excellent size for men. It's like that sweet spot. If women like bigger watches like you, I think it's an excellent choice. But I think definitely in the future, we're going to go with a case that's more geared towards women because we think the market is there and people seem to have interest in it.
So how do people help you get going?
So what I think the best thing to do would be to visit, we have a website, it's like a pre-launch website. We're giving away 4 watches just as like a celebration that we exist.
What's the website, Brian?
It's prelaunch.hawthornwatchco.com. And they can go, they can enter their email, and they'd be entered to win one of 4 watches that we're giving away.
And I hope that someday you have a bricks and mortar, and it's a watch company in Connecticut.
As do I.
Brian Dunnigan, thanks so much for coming on, telling us about your story and your grandfather's story as well.
It's been a pleasure. Yeah.
When one they sin, who's this girl? Spend all night kissing, and if one was right here, then who else is missing? Got a little sidetracked if I'm so wishing to find the keys to the door, but it's also a metaphor. Things keep locked in the grocery store of the mind. Just to save time, skip right ahead to the last ride. The harder we look, the less